15. Teotihuacan. Riding that night and right through the next day on the breakneck train ride to the city of Teotihuacan, mighty port city and home of the Imperial Navy, had seemed an eternity to the prince. Each hour served to lessen the ache in his skull and worsen the uncertainty lurking in his gut. Sleeping through the first couple nights in that storied seafaring city of canals and slipways had been worse, each and every dream a weighty enactment of things he feared might come. Every waking minute was spent pacing his room in prayer that his mother had not moved more quickly than he, reading and rereading the note he'd received before the breaking of the siege, tracing Setiawan's handwriting with his thumb. All he could do was wait, and that gnawed viciously at him. Things only grew more excruciating when the Navy's Office of Intelligence in Teotihuacan had received radio messages from its charges at sea. Ichtak, already conscious of how it must look for the Crown Prince of Sholoshahidi to suddenly be nowhere in sight, while the dying coals of battle still simmered south of the border with the Ida lands, was forced to hole up in his chambers for the whole of the morning, in order that his presence remain a secret. As the Imperial Navy's brightest minds fretted over whether this or that piece of information was reliable, he was deaf to it all, left isolated to play through the possibilities in his head. Even when he was scant dozens of feet from the information that would decide his fate, the prince had to wait for each and every word to be confirmed. Only after dusk had long passed into night did Tlaloc arrive at his door. "Sea Marshal Kantlani is ready to speak, Your Majesty," said Tlaloc. Tlaloc's eyes were sunken, as haunted as his must be, and the officer spoke with an air somewhere between dread and relief. Ichtak understood the feeling, for all of them were walking uncharted ground. He prayed that soon, for better or worse, struggle would strip away all this worrying in the shadows and deliver them some much-needed focus. Ichtak's feet matched Tlaloc's brisk pace, and before long they stood before the portly, one-legged Kantlani, as renowned for his wit upon the waves as Ruhualpa had been upon the shore. "The wireless has been chattering all through the day, Your Majesty," Kantlani told the prince, hobbling on his artificial limb around the table to properly greet him. "I apologize for the delay. We've been meticulous, sorting through each and every word. We wanted to be absolutely certain." "I appreciate that," said Ichtak. "We need certainty now, perhaps more than ever before." Kantlani nodded, moving around the table to indicate the band of coastline to the east of the continent on the map which sprawled there, snaking first up the eastern edge of the wild Kandari steppe in the far east, then past the small inlet that marked Kushkotlan province's sole connection to the Yakal Sea, and finally arriving at the great wasteland expanse of the untamed Ida lands. It was a treacherous span, haunted by strange currents, great continental masses of dark seaweed, and monstrous fauna which haunted the minds of sailors even in the age of steel hulls. There were odd reports of traffic in the Yakal Sea even before the Ida incursion, Kantlani explained. "We knew they were not our ships. Small craft, civilian, of foreign make, almost certainly Lautani. They were spotted by radar in shoreline forts on the Kushkotlan cliffs starting about a month ago. I moved ships around to some of the strategic harbors cut into the cliffs, just to be safe," said Kantlani, pointing out two small naval installations carved into Kushkotlan's short stretch of forbidding coast. "I waited for word from on high to intervene, though. Worries like this seem minor right up until they very suddenly don't, you understand. It's a shame I didn't risk it sooner." Ichtak nodded, saying, "I had reports which said similar things, but the information was too tenuous to take before the Tlatoani. When the first rumblings of what had happened at the northern border trickled west into Teotihuacan, I sent messages to Tepeclan requesting permission to intercept the ships as they returned across the Yakal," Kantlani told him. "I must admit, though, I took the liberty of sending out boarding parties before I heard a response." "A wise move," Ichtak said, nodding. It turned out to be, fortunately, said Kantlani. We've been hearing back from the interceptors all through the past few days, but the most interesting finds were wired just this morning. Tapping the map just north of the Kandari coast, Kantlani silenced the already ordered room of officers, the prince and the assorted admirals and officials, waiting with bated breath for what would follow. There were 9 small ships, Lautani vessels, built for speed. They were marked as if they'd hailed from the Isles, at least. We halted them, boarded them, and found every single one of them was crewed by mixed crews of Sholoshaishans and Lautani from Estlan province, not foreign sailors from the Duumvirate. The crews of both vessels breached cyanide capsules they'd been supplied with when they were rounded up on deck, but it soon became evident they'd all been with the Inquisition, some of them quite highly ranked. I understand the boarding parties found triplanes and a fair stock of weaponry on the ships, along with signs they'd been operating some kind of strikes into the Idalands during the week or so they spent anchored off the coast. Kantlani shook his head, moving his hand north to indicate a position farther out into the sea. Just an hour later, we found another, larger ship, this one a scrap steamer of Kandari mercenaries heading south. They fought the boarding party. All of the Easterners were slain. Our men found a large haul of scrap metal, probably pilfered during a landing in the Idalands. Kantlani brought his narrowed amber eyes up to meet Ichtak's. Nearly half the haul was a slew of spent gas canisters, reeking, recently emptied. They had been painted with a manufactory seal from the Lautani archipelago, but the tops had the serial numbers of Tepeklan factories on them. We can't be sure yet, but we think they held chlorine gas. Given what we'd heard Kushkotlan was reporting from the front lines, we knew we'd stumbled on something important. Tlaloc stepped up then, handing Ichtak a transcribed telegram. From Legate Koyot, by way of the Ektal contingent guarding Kushkotlan, Tlaloc explained. The city has become wary of clergy sent north from the capital. His mountaineers have reported strange things being fetched from beyond the lines. They've found sappers' tunnels, far too small for Ida, used to collapse the border forts in the passes from below. They were crawling with inquisitors sweeping for information when they arrived. Strange for the Inquisition to operate where military intelligence would usually be the better bet, Kantlani mused. Strange indeed, Ichtak muttered. These men have cargo they won't allow the Kushkotlan legionaries or Ektal to see, yes? Yes, Your Majesty, Tlaloc answered. They bear the seal of the Tlatoani. The message he held told him all he needed to know. Inquisitorial secrecy was part and parcel of their operations anywhere in the Empire, but it was the intercepted Ida runners speaking of retribution that solidified his path. I need rangers from the mountaineer units to try and slip into the Idalands at once, Ichtak told Tlaloc, turning to face him. Confirm these Ida reports of gassed barrow dens. Put Legate Koyot on the job. I'm sure he's ready to put his new promotion to the test. And tell him to keep the list of people who know short. Her Highness will already know we're sniffing around, but to the citizenry, this must all come out at once. No half measures on secrecy. Tlaloc saluted, clenched his fist to his chest, and left the room for the communications tower, ready to relay the orders. Thank you, Sea Marshal, said Ichtak, nodding to first the Master of the Navy and then the gathered officers around him. You've done the Empire proud. Whatever comes, know that I'll remember that. Sea Marshal Kantlani was not wholly in the know, but the day's events likely told the wise old sailor enough to infer what must be about to unfold. It was rare in these staid, civil days, an event which had not been experienced for centuries, but if the news worried the old commander, he did not let it show. Our honor, my lord, Kantlani returned, saluting before bowing low. The gathered naval staff followed suit, Ichtak returning the salutes before wheeling to leave the room. The prince made for his quarters, stopping only to order his train car be silently made ready to depart for the capital at the first word from the mountaineers. Then, Ichtak reclined on the bed, obsessively checking and rechecking the notes which had sparked this whole expedition, preparing for one final agonizing wait.